Welcome to the Talent Equation Podcast. If you are passionate about helping young people to unleash their potential and want to find ways to do that better, then you've come to the right place. The Talent Equation Podcast seeks to answer the important questions facing parents, coaches, and talent developers as they try to help young people become the best they can be. This is a series of unscripted, unpolished conversations between people at the razor's edge of the talent community who are prepared to share their knowledge, experiences, and challenges in an effort to help others get better faster. Listen, reflect, and don't forget to join the discussion at thetalentequation.co.uk. Enjoy the show.
Thank you, Radio J, and welcome back to the Talent Equation. I'm giggling already because if ever unscripted and unpolished was the words to describe what's going to happen in the next however long, then here we go. Because I've managed to pull together three really I'd describe as good friends, even though two of them are the other side of the Atlantic. I've got John O'Sullivan, Reed Maltbie, and the ever-present Nick Levett. Guys, welcome to the birthday episode.
Yeah, happy birthday, Stuart.
Happy birthday.
I've got to that stage now where birthdays don't feel so happy anymore, but hey, this is a great way to celebrate it. So,
how does it feel hitting the big 5-0?
Yeah, it's feeling pretty poor actually, pretty poor to be honest. I feel every bit of 50, even though I'm not quite there, Nick. You know full well. Anyway, guys, how's it going? What's happening?
Oh, life is good on this side of the pond. We're between hurricanes and all the other crazy stuff going on in the U.S. I'm not. It's hard to just even turn on the TV anymore.
I feel it. I totally feel it. It's been a very, very difficult place to be over that side. We feel for you. We really do. Reed, how are you? How's things for you?
I'm doing very well. I've been doing a lot of traveling, enjoying working with John for certain.
Great stuff. And Nick, you were on a couple of weeks ago. We know what's going on with you, but how's things with you and the little man?
Yeah, all good. Yeah, tonight we were over to my sister's to play with some Lego, and he picked up a little police character, and he said, "This is a police officer," and I said, "No, it's officer." Yeah. He said, "Officer." I said, "No, officer." He went, "It's a policeman." I went, "Yeah, we'll go with that. Thanks very much." So, yeah, all is good.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I've just got back in from coaching myself. I was working with the under 12s, and then I was working with the academy boys, and then I was working with the second team. So it was a bit of a full-on evening, but pretty enjoyable. Now, John, you're on a bit of a time frame. So the way we're going to do this, everybody, is everybody's come with a thing to talk about, and we're just going to get stuck into it, and we're going to kind of see where the conversation goes. So John's under a bit of time pressure because he's got one of his youngsters who will be waiting for him to be picked up. So John, why don't you jump straight in with your topic for the evening?
Yeah, great. Well, thanks, Stuart. And I thought you sent out to us, hey, how about we each come up with a question for the rest to deal with? And on the day that you asked that, I was working with, a youth organization that was part of a professional club, just talking about, a coach that was a problem. And this is something that comes across me a lot, where organizations have, they know that they have a problem coach with how he or she relates to children, how they treat them, how they relate to parents. But they're afraid to confront the coach, or they're afraid to say anything about his or her method or treatment of players. And so, I wanted to throw out to you guys, right? What do you tell people when they tell you, hey, here's the coach, and they're doing everything against what this club stands for?
Yes.
What should we do?
It's a good one. It's a really good one. It's a doozy. Who wants to jump in on that one first?
Go on, we'll let you, the birthday boy. I think that's only fair.
Yeah, I mean, do you know what? It's funny. I've come up against this just on the weekend actually, where my youngsters were playing in a competition match against another team, and they and the coach on the other team was just giving it absolutely loads on the sideline. It proper joystick coaching, Reed.
Yes.
He had the full on the Xbox controller going, trying to get them all, but he was doing it vocally. And I could see the other coaches and some of the other parents just looking over and kind of getting a bit embarrassed, but nobody knew what to do. And at one point, I was actually refereeing the game, and I actually at one point nearly stopped the game and actually went over to him and said, "Do you know what? Can we let these kids play? Would that be all right?" And I didn't do it. So actually, it's quite. I felt that maybe it wasn't my place, but nobody knows what to say to that individual, and I'd love to find a way of being able to address that without causing some sort of big issue.
I mean, that's the problem. Is you get either a backfire effect or the reflex of people when you point out something they're doing, that they immediately fire back vehemently about how what they're doing is right or how crazy you are, because people don't see themselves. They don't think they're as bully as the coaches that we talk about. It's mythological.
Yeah, so it's that self-reflection piece as well of kind of when you actually make people aware of that, then obviously that's something that's somebody holds a mirror up to you. That's pretty stark, isn't it? That's going to be difficult for somebody to take. So managing that's pretty. Nick, you're usually either you veer, I reckon, between being directly forthright and just telling them how it is, or being very subtle and very clever. I reckon you've got something to chip in here.
Yeah, well, I think ultimately, that coach that's causing a right hullabaloo on the side of the pitch, they do more harm than good. And you're right. Nobody likes being told they're doing something wrong. So it's clever ways and tactics that you can use to start to influence them. And it might not be there and then, because that might cause some conflict with a bit more of a directed approach. But we do a lot of stuff with our kind of mentors that we send out to grassroots clubs to work with some of those coaches. And you're right, sticking a mirror up to them is the right thing to do. So one of my colleagues put together a really little simple thing about how a coach can video his own session, whether it's with an iPad or an iPhone, and use the headphones as a little microphone, start the two at the same time, and then sit down afterwards and watch it. That's sometimes a good little tactic to do. And again, it happened also at a Premier League club, under-18s head coach. The analyst went down and said, no, it wasn't the analyst, it was the psychologist, went down to the game and said, I've come down to film the game today. And the coach was really pleased because he was like, well, we can look back and I can look at all these tactics and all these kind of bits and pieces. And then when they got back up into the analyst room afterwards, he put on the video, and all he'd recorded for 90 minutes was the coach on the side of the pitch. And there was his mirror right there. And they could then start to address, the impact of his body language and, storming up and down the touchline, the impact that had on the players. So, there is some little tactics, but at times, being direct can have an immediate response. But whether that changes learning in the long term or not, it's a bit. It's way too early to go into drills versus games. But if you do block practice, you might get a short term gain. So going to tell them directly, you might get a performance change immediately. But I don't think that affects learning long term. So I think some of those education methods are ultimately better in the long term to help change behaviour.
Yeah, and I'm just saying, I'm going beyond like just okay, your teaching techniques are less effective than they could be, and just saying someone whose behavior is over the top, where they have kids quitting and certainly kids afraid to play. One of the things that I recommend to organizations that I work with is something that they call in the business world a net promoter score, right? Where you ask your customers, would you recommend this to another? And so I don't know that many parents, and I say on this side of the Atlantic where it is a pay to play model, most parents are not qualified to assess a coach's ability to teach or things like that. But I think they are qualified to assess the following question: would you recommend this coach to another friend or family, right? And the answer to that question can then be put before this coach, where you've got 18 families on your team and 14 out of 18 say, no, I wouldn't. That's a problem. That's a big problem that I think, organizations say, okay, we're not going to retain players. We're not going to attract new ones unless we are stepping in this situation. And yet many are still reluctant to do, even when they have all this evidence and they have the mirror, and they still won't do it. And this is what always amazes me.
I think most clubs, certainly over here, and yours, I think in any sport will do, there'll be a board or a structure or a committee or some kind of management type organisation within that club that have got responsibility as well. They have to start to go, well, look, here's the code of conduct. This is what we expect as good practice from our coaches. And ultimately, if they're not doing that and they're losing players and they're stopping kids from playing the game, sorry, but you ain't going to coach here. So sometimes those tough decisions have to be made as well.
Yeah, Nick, it lends to your quote that I use all the time, that that culture eats talent for breakfast. It's the problem is a lot of the clubs, at least what we're seeing over here in America, is their culture is around outcomes, and so they point to, this is how many kids have gotten scholarships. This is how this coach. I've heard the excuse so many times. This coach gets results, but at what cost? And what's the long term result look like? Like John said. If there's another way to measure it other than outcomes, then you start to see, okay, so he had a winning season, but how many of those players are going to return next year? Because that's a much more important factor to measure. And you're right. Our board members, a lot of times, that's where they really need to be focused in on, is the why. Why are you here, and what are the values that should be leading you? Like that whole New Zealand All Black thing, that's the legacy that you're creating. So if somebody doesn't fit your culture, no matter how good they are, they may not just belong in that culture, because they have an opportunity to spoil the entire bunch, right?
I'm going to chip in here as well, and maybe get throw a bit of Mark Bennett on this one as well, because he's obviously provided a bit of guidance my way on a number of occasions. And I think one of the things he would always talk about is, it links to what you were saying a little bit, Nick, around a code of conduct. One of the problems with the code of conduct often is it's, and this as well as I do, is it's a document that sits on a shelf somewhere that nobody really refers to unless there's a
absolutely.
problem. But perhaps it's about framing. I think people often struggle to identify what kind of good looks like, and how that should, how we should espouse that. But what people always do know is what bad looks like. And so actually establishing what is unacceptable amongst a group of coaches. So this is start of the season. This is unacceptable. So what would be unacceptable for us? So for example, kids leaving because they're so unhappy that they're not getting enough pitch time, or kids leaving because they're being shouted at, or kids leaving because they're being abused. That's unacceptable. So once you've established your unacceptables, then you can use that as a reference point with any conversation you have with a group of coaches. You do exactly the same with a group of athletes if you were trying to help them develop. So I think clubs have just got to be a bit more robust about establishing what unacceptable looks like.
Yeah.
And then again, holding everybody accountable for unacceptable, right? I mean, that's I think the biggest thing is that then that goes across the board. I think one of the things that I see a lot, and I think this even happens in professional clubs that don't have this code or these core values or this culture that goes from age 6 to age 36, is that you get this kingdom approach to coaching, where every age group or every team is its own little kingdom, and each kingdom values different things. And that's very confusing for kids when in one kingdom being humble or something is something that's highly valued, and then in the next kingdom, unless they're vocal and outspoken, they're not valued. And the coaches can be so different, and the sideline culture can be so different. And so again, it comes back around to what is the culture of this organization, so that there's the consistent things that are valued throughout. Now, something like accountability means something different for an 18-year-old than it does for an 8-year-old, but you can still always talk about being accountable. And this is where I think organizations really have to look at the whole, not just, team by team or age by age.
And going with what sorry, go ahead.
No, go on. No, go for it.
Oh, I was just going to say, and going on what John says, one of the ways that we've had tremendous success with this is clearly defining those values in physical manifestations. So gratitude means, because it's vague to an 8-year-old, and it does have a different meaning, to make it real for everybody. Gratitude as an organization means that we go over and we thank the parents after the game. Respect means we shake the referee's hand and we shake our coach's hand and say thank you. And so now the kids see these values, and the parents and everybody starts to see these values living and breathing daily, and it's a lot easier than to point to something and say, that's unacceptable no matter what age or what team it is. That kingdom isn't doing it the way the rest of us are.
Yeah, some of the clubs over here have started to develop like a language, so that everybody knows, right, this is what we stand for in a club, and we use the words in the same way. So in the same way that you might develop a football language about how you coach and how you play, there's also a club language, that how they go about talking to each other and what's acceptable and what's not. So it all fits quite neatly into that as a concept.
Definitely, and that lends right into the All Blacks, right? Legacy. They speak their own language as an organization.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
It's interesting though, like you say, I think in a lot of those situations, coaches do have, and I think you allude to this, quite often the coach is kind of the hub. They're the center of the whole thing. They kind of make it work, and they build quite a lot of. They have a lot of power because they hold all the cards, I suppose, in terms of selection, and they make everything work and everything else. And how they say that power corrupts, don't they? And I do think that's sometimes it's not. I don't think it's necessarily the person it has malice. It's just that they've developed this kind of aura about them that means that they act in ways that are not helpful. And I do think there's a role to be played there about helping people be honest with each other. And this goes back to something that a good friend of mine, Jamie Edwards, talks about a lot. He says the difference between chats and conversations. A conversation is something where you have a degree of honesty, and something's going to happen at the end of a conversation. I think a lot of people in sports clubs tend to have a lot of chats. They talk to each other, they're not really saying anything, and we're skirting around the subject. I think we just need a lot more really good conversations and some honesty, and that's a healthy culture, isn't it?
It is. It is, and John and I talk a lot about connection. So I've had people ask, well, how do you give feedback to players? Well, if you have connection, you can give honest, direct feedback to anybody. And so if clubs are really working hard on connecting with their coaches and connecting people in intentional ways on working on this culture and treating culture with as much reverence as they do skill development, then you can have those conversations with people, and that feedback is much more effective because there is that personal investment and connection there, right?
And I would say, Stuart, what's interesting about this, and I don't know if you've seen yet, I think it either just published October 1st or is coming out next week, the U.S. Olympic Committee's, what does quality coaching really look like, right? And they have this whole document and the different components of quality coaching. So instead of just saying, oh, well, when we know it when we see it, or we know it when we're not seeing it, like how can we define it and how can we evaluate coaches on it? And from an athlete perspective, one component of it, they're calling it athlete-centered outcomes. So we're not just, evaluating our athletes on the development of their competence, but we're also evaluating them on have they grown in confidence, have they grown in connection, and have they grown in character. And I think that's really interesting because we rarely evaluate coaches on those other 3 C's. We just say, oh, well, look, they pass better, they kick it better, they throw it better, whatever. But now what they're saying at the USOC level is, unless they have improved in these other areas as well, you're not doing your job as a coach.
That's is Jean Coté behind some of that stuff?
Jean Coté and Wade Gilbert is the other one, I think, who's the lead author on the document, but a whole bunch of people from the USOC are behind it.
Awesome. And that's just come out, you say?
I know it comes out this month. I've seen it. There's a big USOC event next week, and maybe that's when it gets officially released. But it's done.
It's a pretty brilliant work too.
That's a big task,
brilliant.
I think. It's very difficult to define good coaching, isn't it?
And as Chris Snyder, who's their director of coaching education, said, he said, how do we define good coaching? So if I go up to a coach and say, are you a great coach? And they say, oh yeah, our athletes won 6 medals in the last Olympics. And he says, okay, fair enough. So if the next World Championships, you don't win any medals, then you're no longer a great coach. And of course they say, oh, of course not. No. So then how can we define it? So this is their first shot across the bow is, hey, let's define great coaching so that we can actually evaluate coaches on a set of criteria that we can look at, and so that our athletes that reach the highest levels have the character to match their talent.
It's interesting because there's something similar happening over here, but in a different way. And from a more negative background, and Nick will be very acutely aware of this, where we've had some pretty bad stories emerging around kind of abusive practice by coaches historically within a number of different sports now. It's become an increasingly big problem. Quite a lot of people are coming forward with stories of quite horrific, sort of historical abusive acts. But also that's then translated into some of our most successful Olympic sports, whereby like a bullying culture has emerged, or certainly a culture that doesn't respect athletes, for their differences and things like that. And as a result of that, a report was produced called a duty of care report by a pretty famous Paralympic athlete, Dame Tanni Gray-Thompson, and a lot of that is having some pretty profound effects on coaching, because it's now challenging us around the idea of, it's even at the elite level, it's not win at all costs, because there are significant human costs to that. And so actually we're now being challenged to win, but without kind of denigrating human dignity. It's quite an interesting dynamic.
Well, it's a lovely segue into my kind of topic of discussion. I see that you planned that quite nicely there. Very good. It's a nice feather light one of how do we get some adults involved in youth sport to recognise that it isn't just about the performance, or it isn't just about the scoreline at the end of a match, a game, or whatever you're playing, and there is a true value in developing the whole person. So how do we change behaviour to recognise that it's more than that? And bizarrely, although we shared some questions prior to this, it kind of came up this week when an ex-professional player who's taken his own son's team said, "Yeah, I wanted to win in a must-win under-12 match, because there's a lot of must-win under-12 matches, you can imagine." But we're kind of forgetting that the importance of enjoyment, development, learning, fun, all those kind of intrinsic things that keep kids playing sport. So how do we start to affect behaviour to make sure that adults and coaches recognise that it's more than just the scoreline?
Wow, that's a big one.
John, if you can solve this in the next 7 minutes, mate, before you've got to go, that'd be awesome.
Well, you know what? I think we'll refer back to someone that Stuart mentioned before, who he has since connected me with, which is who is Mark Bennett, who says, performance is not an outcome, it's a behavior, right? And that phrase has really stuck with me, in that, especially the younger the kids get, where we really are saying, you don't know what the score of the game was last year on May 12th, yet boy, it sure seemed important that day, but you don't even remember it a year from now or 6 months from now. But the younger the kids are, realistically what we're doing is that we're shaping behavior as coaches. Are they coachable? Do they communicate? Do they work hard? Are they focused? Do they display character? Do they respect? Are they humble and are willing to do the little things, instead of looking at, are they dominating the game, which, as we all know, usually is because they're bigger, faster, stronger than everyone else and has nothing and is not a great predictor of how they're going to do 5 years from now or 10 years from now for certain. And so I love this idea of that our job as coaches is first to get the behavior right. And if we get the behaviors right, then the X's and O's slide in well on top of those things. And then our job as coaches is also to communicate that to the parents of the children that we are coaching. Because, there's always the outliers, but most parents are sensible. And if you tell them, look, this is what we're really focusing on here, is developing these correct behaviors so that your son or your daughter will come back year after year and continue to progress regardless of where she is in her physical maturation. These are going to give her the best chances of succeeding long term, because these are qualities that every coach at every age looks for. we have to include the parents in the process of this is what we're doing and this is what we're shaping. And until we get this right, the rest of this stuff really doesn't matter. Now, you'll always find the person who just says, yeah, that's nice. We better win this weekend. Right. But I don't think that's the majority of people. They do respect the fact that you're teaching their kid to work hard, to be humble, to work with others, to ask, what can I give, not always what can I get. And so recognizing that most parents appreciate that, recognizing that that is the pathway to developing great athletes in the long term and allowing people to reach whatever their genetics and everything will allow them to reach. I think I've had great success in doing that for many years, but you have to include the parents in the conversation of this is what I'm doing and this is why I'm doing it. And I think Mark Bennett's terminology there is a very good way of saying, hey, this is why I'm doing it. How was that, Nick?
It's not bad. You got 4 minutes, so if you can expand a little bit.
Stretch it.
Reed, any thoughts?
So I'm John's spot on about the whole behavior thing. It's right now what we've got is we've got a win at all costs mentality. And what we need parents and coaches and everybody to understand is that winning is a byproduct of all the other major pieces of the culture, one of them being a compete at all times mentality. So it's shifting kids from thinking like winners to thinking like warriors, to focusing on the process and mastery and all that. And it's putting in front of those people that see outcomes as the only thing, those opportunities to show that when we challenge children to be a little bit better every day, to seek their own personal excellence, when we teach them to compete at all times, the results are so much greater and so much more long term. And so it's a hard process, but it's, I when I go into clubs, I put the winner and warriors side by side. Here's what a winner thinks. It's all about me. Here's what a warrior thinks. It's all about we. Here's what a winner thinks. It's about getting to the trophy, right? Whereas a warrior says, no, it's who you become along the way. And it's just, and like John said, if you're educating the parents, because they're the big ones, because in the end, they'll do anything and everything they can to see their kid happy, healthy, and succeeding, right? So if you can get the parents to buy into this idea that we're shaping young people to succeed in life, and we're going to use the coaches to help do that, now the parents are going to hold those coaches accountable, and they stop checking the rankings of 10-year-olds and where they are nationally and counting the trophies, and they start asking, is coach serving my child to be successful beyond the game?
It would be good if we could start to find those models of success and celebrate those that do a great job developing better people in different sports, rather than put up the league table at the end of the year about the ones that score the most goals or the ones that's got the most points. But actually, here's the league table of clubs that have done an amazing job, that have taken on more kids. This is their retention rates from one year to the next, because kids have so much fun they just don't want to leave or stop playing. They're the clubs that we should be holding up and celebrating the success of as much as anything else, not just the ones that win a trophy at the end of the year.
Yeah, no, I agree completely with you.
I couldn't agree with that more. But interestingly, I think that's a challenge for those of us who work in the sports sector, who kind of make our living out of it. Is we've got to prize some of these things, and we've got to openly prize these. So. Guys, I'm going to give you a piece of advice, right? To buy shares in, those clickers that bouncers at the doormen at nightclubs use to count people in and count people out. Buy shares in those, because I'm going to tell you something now that's just that's the thing that's going to blow up. Right? So I had a conversation today with Russell Earnshaw, who's a guy who works at England Rugby. Brilliant guy. He just came on the podcast, and he told me something, and I'll share it with you now because I think it's absolutely fantastic. He said, look, if we want to prize things, if we want to change the culture, we've got to show people that it's important. So he went to a rugby festival the other day. There was 4 clubs playing. And he got the coaches and all the parents, everybody else to buy into this idea. And they had people with these clickers counting. And every time a coach made a positive statement towards one of the players on the opposition, they got a point. Every time one of the players made a positive comment to either one of their own players or one of the opposition players, they got 5 points. Every time a parent made a positive statement about one of the opposition players, they got 20 points. He said, you wouldn't believe the competitiveness of these people desperately trying to get points, and how positive and what a fantastic environment it was. And I think if we go back to the point you made earlier on, let's talk about connection. let's talk about character, let's talk about caring, all those 5 C's. And what if we had every single festival we go to, there's points given out for the team or the coaches or the parents who espouse those values the most? It'd be a fantastic experience, wouldn't it?
But strangely you say that. So I used to run, blimey, God, how long ago was this? Like 2000, maybe 2001. I used to do a mini soccer festival every year for under 7s to under 10s, and it was purely based on fair play. So it was not based upon scores. We didn't even keep scores. Literally, the referees gave the teams a score at the end. The parents got marked. The kids got marked. The coaches got marked. On and off the pitch, everything, and all of that went towards the winner. And it came back every year as one of those events and one of those tournaments that was massively oversubscribed because they just wanted to come and play at this one. Just because it was a nice day out for the parents, it was a nice day for the kids. It was thoroughly competitive, absolutely, but it was just a really good environment. So any of those kind of like little practical stuff that Russell talked about there, brilliant. I'm all over them.
Click, 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 click.
Mm-hmm. And I'll throw everything before I leave because I'm at this moment getting scored down in my parenting skills by picking up my son late. I'm getting lots of negative clicks here. My last thought is this: I have a friend in Vancouver, British Columbia, named Willie Cromack, and he started a thing called Go Play Better, where he saw with his young kids in this focus on outcomes. And he came out of the bike racing world and the bike sort of charity world where they would do these rides to raise money for cancer research and things. And he said, what if we could tie our technical things in games, like how many passes we complete, or how many times our wingers take a player on 1v1, or how many times do we play back to the goalkeeper to keep possession instead of just kicking it? What if we could tie those to a charity? And so he started this app, and it's called Go Play Better, and it's really, really interesting because the kids pick a charity, they get a grant, the coach gets a grant where if they hit a technical goal every game, the coach donates money to the team's chosen charity, right? So if they have a mom on the team that has had breast cancer, they all choose to donate to that. And the kids know that, hey, if we connect 150 passes in this game, we're getting a donation to that. And the parents know, hey, I agree to donate $2 instead of buying my kid a smoothie at the end of this thing to this charity. And so at the end of the game, these kids come off and say, how many passes did we get? Or how many times did we play back? And did we hit our goals versus did we just win? And so what if you added on to that, like you're saying, these positive comments or this good character? Let's measure that too. And then we turn it even to a bigger goal of and we support a good cause by focusing on that as well. And Lord knows that if we're 10 years old and we can connect 100 passes, we're probably going to do pretty well in the outcome of games as well.
Yeah, well, and here's my coach's hat. The danger for me is how do we find then the balance between losing the essence of the game and kids passing for passing's sake versus keeping within the ethics of what the game's all about, which might be invading someone's territory, scoring a goal, whatever it might be. And that sometimes becomes the dilemma in those kind of things that, yeah, it's great, and I certainly get all of those kind of outcomes, but it's about making sure that we retain that within the balance of doing what's right. And I wouldn't want kids, completing 5-yard passes in their own half and doing 25 of them because they can for no purpose. And I get that there's a bigger purpose to it, but we also need to find the balance of angles and distances, and giving kids a protractor to work out how far apart they need to be and work out the best way to pass a ball between two people. And it's the balance between all of those things with me, just kind of playing devil's advocate in that one.
Oh yeah, and I agree completely. And you can still add in, and we've got to create 15 good chances in the game, right? So it's not just us, like you said, mindlessly passing the ball back and forth or whatever. But I think, again, in this need to be able to measure the things that we really say that we value, we may have to start getting creative in how we measure them, at least in the beginning, until we find that good balance.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
All right, guys, I'm going to go. You guys enjoy the rest of your beer and Stuart's birthday conversation, and we'll have to do this again sometime.
John, I really appreciate you coming on. I know it's been very difficult in terms of scheduling, but it's a miracle we've all got in the same online space together. So I really appreciate you coming.
See you, John. I'd add one more thing going on. You're talking about putting your coach's hat on, Nick. So going back to what we were talking about earlier, getting these coaches to not focus on outcomes and changing the culture. One of the things is we have to change the way we evaluate our coaches, right? When I was at Soccer Shots, our coaches were all about our 5 main values, and that's when we hired them, because they were working with 2 to 9-year-olds. They were the child's first touch point with the game. We saw ourselves as child development experts, not as coaches. Our goal was to create this fun, and our goal was to generate a lifelong love for the game and instill some movement patterns in the game, right? And so we'd hire our coaches based on whether they exhibited and understood the values as an organization. And then we'd train them on those values, but then we'd do the evaluation, and the evaluation had to do with teaching skills, coaching skills, technical skills, and everything like that. And these coaches were frustrated because they were getting this negative feedback and they'd never been trained on it. So we actually changed the evaluation to also measure what mattered to us, which was these values. And so we did a rubric where it was like, does she show discipline, and isn't organized, doesn't teach to the topic, doesn't keep the kids, blah blah blah, take attendance at the beginning, all these things. And it was 0 to 5, yes, this and this. And so the coaches started leaning into the role because now they were evaluated based on what really mattered to us as an organization, and we were seeing better outcomes with the kids because the coaches were more engaged and they were more focused on getting that process part right. So how do we evaluate our coaches these days? You won a bunch of tournaments, we'll give you the 18 elite team now.
You've just made me think of something there, Reed, and I think you make a really, really good point, which, again, this comes back to, what do we value? And for a long time within coach education and qualifications, and you're getting on my hobby horse now, we value organization, structure, planning, all those things that kids really love. Whereas in actual fact, what is it we're looking for? Now, interestingly, we're doing some work on this about, what are the behaviors we're looking for? And what keeps coming up is we want coaches to be chameleons with jazz hands. I love this phrase. I got it from a guy called Spencer Moore, who's worked in coaching in swimming for a long time, and he's working.
I'm writing it down.
I'm working with him.
I'm just trying to work out what a chameleon with jazz hands looks like.
It kind of freaks me out to think of it, but I know what he's saying.
How do they even stay on a branch?
Hello, my darling. Hello, my baby. You are my.
I don't. How, that's just not going to work, surely. Unless their tail has then become some kind of equilibrium balancing type.
Yeah, they've
thing.
got the curly tail.
Thoroughly impractical.
They've got the curly tail that they hold on to stuff with, so they can do it. Jazz hands, chameleon. It works. Anyway. The point I'm trying to make is, what is it we're looking for? And we talk quite a lot about, whenever you're advertising for a coach, we don't advertise. We advertise the qualifications. We advertise various other things. We don't advertise the behaviours. What are the behaviours we're looking for?
Dude, if you put chameleon with jazz hands on your job advert, you are getting 0 coaches apply.
I tell you what, I would love to see who did apply. It'd be brilliant, wouldn't it?
I'd apply. I know the secret code now, so.
The point I'm trying to make clumsily is that I think we've got to think differently about what it is a coach should do, and I think the point you make, Reed, is a really valid one, which is, you based it originally on the values, or kind of what is it you want them to be like. A large part of coaching for children, beyond the technical and everything else, is you've got to be an entertainer. It's got to be a great experience, hasn't it? Surely.
Yeah. If they're having fun, they're going to want to come back. If they come back, that's when you have more opportunities to build into them. So the longer you get them engaged and having fun, the more chance you have at actually accomplishing something with them, right?
Yeah. I bet you, Nick, talking about your sessions, right? I can imagine, because you're sort of picking up on, where you can go talking about chameleons and the likes. I bet the kids absolutely. I bet the kids love it. They love going with you into these kind of crazy places of analogies and different ideas and being like animals and all that sort of stuff. At the end of the day, I always think that the best kids coaches are big kids themselves.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, without doubt. I've actually I've just started working with a new group of players last night. Went down to my first session with them last night. Under 23s, most of them are about 17 to 19. A lot of lads out of inner city London, driving out into the rural sticks in the villages, out in rural Sussex, which is a culture shock for most of them in the first place. An entirely new group of players that I've never seen before, and trying to then kind of, the football part last night was largely irrelevant. It was, right, who are you, where are you from, how's your day been? Oh, right, okay, well, you're actually asking me about my day? Well, yeah, tell me about your day, what have you done? Why are you half an hour late for starters, And that kind of ability to connect with people, whether it's kids and doing what's appropriate in a way to connect with different kids at different stages, or with these, young lads that a lot of have been released from professional clubs, so they're probably a little bit disillusioned at times with football. And how we then find a way to connect with them at a different level is going to be a different challenge for me. So I'm not going to be chameleon with jazz hands, but there's definitely a way that I think we need to help coaches have the character and the behaviours in order to connect with people. I think that's really important.
Very much so. I think that's what a transformational coach is one that connects more deeply with people. My wife and I call it the cocktail party phenomenon. When you leave a cocktail party, the person that you liked the most there was the one that asked you the most questions about you, because we like talking about ourselves. So kids really do connect in with those coaches who actually show an interest in them and invest in them, and they leave going, wow, that coach really cares about me. He asked me questions about me. He wanted to know what made me tick. And then guess what? As a coach, as John says, once you know what makes them tick, it's a whole heck of a lot easier to teach to each player individually.
And the thing about that is that I think
absolutely,
kind of is, that's a huge part that no one ever talks about in any single coach development or coach education course I've ever attended ever.
Thank you. You hit my question.
What a segue.
Yeah,
Reed,
awesome
over
segue.
to you.
So my issue is, and it's kind of two-pronged, is we've been talking all about it. What we're talking about is the software. It's not the hardware. But everything we do to evaluate, to find, hire, evaluate, and train our coaches in almost every sport deals with the hardware. Do you know the game? Can you teach the skills? Are you skillful yourself? Here's how you do X's and O's. I mean, Dr. Richard Bailey talks about it. He's asking coaches all around the world to tell him about their experiences in coaching clinics, and they're coming back with pseudoscience or fallacies built on the jockocracy that has just spread the word on this is how you coach. You're Bobby Knight, you throw a chair out on the court and the players will respond to you, and it's like, but it's all about drill and skill them to death, right? Make them into robots, enjoy, stick the living daylights out of them. None of those courses ever talk about, here's how you install the software, because the system just doesn't run if it doesn't have the right operating system, right? And the software is communication skills, psychology, connecting with them. It's understanding development models, and like where 5-year-olds are all over the board in the development model. And it's understanding, simple ethics, all that. None of that's taught, right? So that was my big question is, why are we so focused on the hardware when we all get that? I can Google a million drills tomorrow, or I can reach out to people I trust like you guys to say, hey, I'm stuck and I need this. I see it all the time. Why aren't we teaching them the software? And secondly, why aren't we using the science to drive how we teach the software? Because science is nowhere in the picture.
I've been at the FA a long time now, and I look back at where we were and now where we are, and I'm pleased to say, Reed, how much we've changed and moved forwards on that. So take our Advanced Youth Award, for example. It's split into 3-day blocks of learning. 3 days on technical tactical, 3 days on physical, 3 days on psychological, 3 days on social. So,
oh my gosh, that's awesome.
The whole kid gets valued for them, and every part has equal weighting. So it's not dominated in any way by what's your technical and tactical knowledge, because if you don't understand attachment theory or social learning theory, what you know about is largely irrelevant, and it's the they don't care about what you know until they know that you care kind of stuff, isn't it? So where we've kind of gone with our work now, it's very much underpinned by academic research and evidence to say, look, what's the best thing in order for us to help develop young people as well as better players. The level one is fairly similar in the sense that it's now backed around kind of sound educational learning theory that kind of runs across all our coach education. But I look back to when I kind of first started, and I did a junior team managers award, and it was focused on 11v11 with 10-year-olds doing phases of play, and it was a nonsense. But I look at where we are now, and we've made huge strides. So whilst I don't think it's perfect, and probably nor will it ever be, I think we've also got to recognise, certainly from my experiences in where I work, where we've come from actually is a long way, and I think we should be quite proud of that as well. But recognising, as Reed said, there's definitely a lot more work we need to do on that.
I concur as well. As somebody, obviously, my day job involves working in coaching across all different sports. I think, and you'll know this as much as anybody, Nick, people are very quick to criticise the FA, for pretty much anything.
Yeah.
And, and constantly, there's things on Twitter about, we haven't got enough UEFA B coaches and this, that and the other. But I actually think the Youth Awards they're a pioneer. And actually, they're a bit of a beacon, sort of a global beacon. And actually, I'm not just talking about in football. I'm talking about in kind of a lot of sport, because they've genuinely taken the individual as the starting point and a development there. And I know exactly how hard that's been culturally to try and drive through, and also internally just to kind of change the culture and change the ethos, and also some of the mechanics and the infrastructure required to bring about that kind of change. Really, really difficult work. So, I think that's something that the association should be commended for. I really do.
I think, we were fortunate that we had a guy called Pete Sturgis who was involved in writing one of them, a guy called Paul Holder, and a guy called John Allpress. And all three of them have been very big influences in my coaching. And all of them, I don't think it's any coincidence, all three are ex-teachers. They just happen to be quite good and know some football stuff as well. So they come from a sound educational pedagogy background, and they've just added the football content to it as well.
See, I'm so glad you guys said that, because I was starting to lose hope, because I don't see that on this side. I mean, that's my frustration, is the fact that, I was recently told, well, we don't need you at this particular conference this year because we rotate through your types of presentations. And I was like, what, on ethics and communication skills and psychology? I mean, I got a master's in early childhood education and a master's in psych, and you don't need your coaches to understand that stuff? Oh, well, I'm like, I was blown away, because bottom line is we're educators and we're shapers of human beings, right? So I'm glad to see, and I hope you guys share it across the pond, because we're still struggling with, as John Kessel and John O'Sullivan say, we're still struggling. If we were doctors and we were still applying the same kind of methods that we were 40 or 50 years ago, we'd probably get sued for malpractice. But that's where we are. We're still teaching the same things the same way it was 50 years ago on our side of the pond. And we're wondering why the system's broken, or I like the fact you're evenly weighting things, because I've seen this type of stuff tacked on. Like, you do 20 hours of hard on field stuff, and it's like, oh, by the way, we're going to do an hour-long lecture on how to communicate with kids. That's not long enough.
Yeah, well, sorry, Stuart. You see some of our guys on when they come on those courses, and they're they're well qualified coaches in a football sense, but they're like a rabbit in headlights when people start talking about the kid and how kind of early years experiences shape some of the later things that you might have to try and unpick as a coach. It's fascinating to see, and I think we're fortunate there's good people doing that kind of work.
I think one of the things there, Reed, just to talk about there is that I suppose one of the things we have in the UK that's different from the States is quite a strong coach education culture. I don't think that's necessarily altogether a good thing. I think there's plenty of negatives to that. But the one thing we have established, I suppose, is this idea that to be recognised as a coach, you do have to have undertaken some kind of learning, whereas in the States it's a bit more hit and miss. Am I right in thinking that?
Did you play? Did you play for at least 3 years at a high level? Can you still play? Here's your license. And by the way, we'll give you a club of 2,500 kids. What? I mean, that's... I got into an argument at one point because I chose to go on and get a master's instead of play at any level past college. And they were offering exemptions to certain level licenses. And I said, well, at that point, I then had 2 master's degrees. I have 2 master's degrees and 20-some years of experience. Yeah, we can't exempt you. But you will a guy who only played 3 years in the pros? What advantage does he have stepping on the field? It's like, yeah. So, but it's what we value culturally, right? That's how we've always been, is we value those outcomes, and that's what happens, right? We're valuing the skill, the hardware over the software.
Does that still kind of manifest itself with ex-professional players getting top elite professional jobs over those career coaches in American sport as well?
Yes, and I always point out Michael Jordan, because Michael Jordan was probably the greatest NBA player ever to grace the courts. And how'd he turn out as a coach? Oh yeah, that was not a good result, because he didn't have any of those skills. Doesn't mean he's a bad person, bad coach. He just didn't have the skills to translate what he knew of the game to other people, right? And we still do. We heavily weight technical directors of coaching, executive directors at clubs, and it's not just in soccer, it's in other sports, are former professionals. And you're giving them a license to as John Wise of Sports Illustrated says, an untrained professional is also a form of abuse. You're giving them license to do a lot of damage without any knowledge, because what we don't know, and that can be dangerous.
So can you see a move happening in the US, Reed, to kind of professional? Well, I mean, I don't want to say professionalize, but to bring this to the table a little bit more around the idea of qualification, or at the very least some form of expertise recognition for coaches? Or do you think it's going to be a sport by sport basis? Because I sort of feel with what John was saying around the Olympic Committee and stuff like that there's a potential for a movement to take place to kind of say that a coach is this, and if you don't get this, then this is not a coach. It sounds to me like you're moving in that direction, or it's too early to say that.
We're moving in that direction, and so I'm taking the bleak outlook just because I'm frustrated with banging. We're getting frustrated banging our head against the wall on a regular basis. I feel like Don Quixote chasing windmills with my staff. And then I go north to Canada, and they've got. So here's our thing: we're fragmented, right? So every sport governs itself, and within the sport, there are multiple pathways that govern themselves. I mean, you need a degree in engineering just to understand the soccer pyramid in the U.S., right? And all the different little facets, and NPSL and PDL and USL, and and then U.S. club versus. It's just like, whoa! You need an engineering degree just to see all the different offshoots. You go to Canada, and it's like they've got one body governing everything, sport PEI, sport New Brunswick, sport this, and it's all top down, and information is being driven. And it's like, we need a leader like that, like the USOC, because I saw the document too, and it's absolutely brilliant, because it touches on, like you said, Nick, it's balanced across everything, saying this is what makes a quality coach, not whether you can play the game and you can put them in lines and make them, run till they puke and kick balls a lot. This is what makes a great coach. And so we need to defragment a little bit, but we need somebody like the USOC to step up and say, listen, it needs to be one body that's helping drive this professionalization. Soccer is our biggest issue because most soccer coaches are not viewed as professionals, and it's disrespectful because they're giving up that time and that energy and investment to the kids, and and it's like it should be treated as a professional realm. And so you're starting to see these classes pop up, this master's degree in coaching at several universities and stuff, which is great to see, because that's what you do when you get your teaching degree. You don't just go and learn how to teach kids 1 + 1. You learn the science behind learning, and you learn the ethics behind working with children, and you learn communication patterns and development issues and all those other things that come into play, because that's what makes you a great teacher. And they're finally starting to see that with coaching. It's just, it'll take time, I think. And that's why I feel so bleak about it some days,
Well, hopefully that's where you guys and Changing the Game project can be the people that lead the wolf pack. It's going to take somebody to be that catalyst for change. So you guys need to keep banging away at what you're doing, because I'm sure it's making a massive difference.
I hope so. And it's here the thing is I may never see the difference it makes, and I'm fine with that. But this is the choice I made, so I'll keep doing it. And gosh, there's so many guys like John out there, and it's like we're all starting to gravitate towards each other and connect like you guys are, and this is what really makes it go. is when I was at a conference last week and somebody shows up and says, I just came from a conference with Marco Sullivan and Jean Cote and Jason DeVos. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I mean, these are the people, these are the thought leaders. And it's like, we're all starting to bump into each other. And that's when it really will really get that momentum, is when we're bringing people across the pond. And all of those people like John and myself and everybody else are starting to communicate with each other and coordinate what we're doing. And then we become a movement, right? Not just a bunch of nutcases with staffs chasing windmills.
And I think that's important. It's important to say that, you know, I mean, quite often these things start from the ground up. It doesn't always have to come from the top down.
You know, it doesn't. I think it has to come from the ground, you know, and it has to come from, we all made the same mistakes, right? We made the same mistakes, and somebody finally held the mirror up to us and was like, should you really be saying that way to that kid? Or should you really be teaching 5-year-olds that in that manner because they're 5 and not 18, you know?
And actually,
Nick, going to what you were saying earlier, I love working with the high school and college age kids, or, you know, the older kids, because I'll treat them like I do my 5-year-olds, and I'll tell them, I'll come from like a 5-year-old session and say, okay, I just came from working with 5-year-olds, so bear with me. And it's interesting to see you unlock those behaviors and those feelings and that personality that they haven't seen in so many years, because we've told them they need to act older and grow up and be mature. And it's so awesome to see 20-year-olds acting like 5-year-olds again, because Coach Reed is acting like one, and so it's okay.
Look, I think we all act like, you know, I don't know, Stuart, I don't know how long you plan on talking for tonight, but ultimately we all act like children. So, well, maybe some of the good ones do. I'm not sure. Because while we've been doing this podcast, I've been swapping messages with my girlfriend, who's currently away with the England under-21s with European qualifiers. And she's been sending me messages. And I said, look, you know, I'm doing this podcast tonight. And she said, well, why don't you try and get some of these words into the conversation? So very early on, I talked about there being a hullabaloo on the side of the pitch, which is not normally a word I would use. So I've also put in feather, protractor, rabbit, and I just dropped in the wolf.
That's well done. The protractor was my favorite. I was like, where did he come up with that?
I didn't notice that. That's really
yeah. So those 5... We'll have to entirely give her credit for. But she's working with the England under-21s and still has that sense of humour. We'll do this kind of stuff, and largely just to amuse ourselves, we do those kind of things as well. And I genuinely thought Camellia with jazz hands was you doing the same thing, Stuart.
Hey, look at Pep, though. If you watch videos of Pep at training, he's goofing off. I mean, he gets serious, and his players know, but he's built such a deep connection that he can get in his players' faces and be direct with them. But if you see him at training, man, he's just having fun most of the time, right?
Absolutely. I think when his beard is longer, then he's a bit more serious. And
I think your point is, I think if you can coach 5-year-olds, I mean, you know, I do on a regular basis every Sunday morning coach 5. If you can entertain 5-year-olds, you can work with anybody. I almost think that you need to take, you know, those pros that come down and, you know, like you say, they get the exemption, this, that, and the other. Okay, fine, yeah, you can do that. Just go and coach those 5-year-olds. Let's see how you get on. And if you can do that, then you can get your exemption. That would be the best test ever, because those people haven't got the first clue how to engage those sorts of people.
No.
Yeah, absolutely.
I completely agree.
It's a different skill set. It's absolutely, you know, you need to be an expert in working with them, because it's very different to working with, you know, testosterone fueled teenagers, and it's very different working with elite, you know, under 21s or professional players. I think you have to have a different skill set for each, and the hardest ones certainly are the youngest ones at times. But
they unlock so many cool skills. Like, you learn to get and keep people's attention. You learn to tell stories in shorter time frames. You learn to distill things in its most common denominator, right? You don't teach something complex to a 5-year-old. You teach it in short, simple steps that they can relate to. You know, and it teaches you to use the language of the people you're teaching. You can't teach a skill that you just taught to 21-year-olds, if it's applicable, in the same way to a group of 5-year-olds, because they don't understand that language. You know, I want you to do a pullback, and they're like, a pullback, and like a bear claw. Grab that fish with your bear claw and just pull it back towards you. You know, and you just have to find ways to speak to them that they totally get.
Oh, yeah, otherwise you end up getting the opposite. And I remember being at a game, and it was an under-9s game, so 8-year-old kids, and the coach said to the kid, just, you know, go on, and I want you to play in the hole. And like 10 minutes later, this kid's come back over to the coach and said, look, I've looked around the whole pitch, I can't find any holes.
Yep.
I'm like, well, maybe that's the coach's fault, not the kid's fault.
Yep, exactly. We used to always say, get open, right?
Yeah.
And you tell a kid to get open, and they just run to the big open space, and they don't think about the fact that they now run to the other side of the field with 10 people between them and the person with the ball, right? So we started saying, like, show both feet. I learned it from another coach. He said, show both feet. And I was like, oh, my gosh, I love that. So we started telling our 8-year-olds, go to where your teammate who has the ball can see both of your feet. Because if they can see your feet, then they can probably pass you the ball. And you had to build off of that because, of course they would still. But it was like, you say to an 18-year-old, get open, and they understand. But you say it to an 8-year-old, and they're like, okay, I'm open. I ran all the way over here by the cars, and there is nobody here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Love that.
I love that as well, because that's one of the great things about it. It teaches you a lot. Coaching children teaches you an awful lot about communication, because they'll take you so literally, won't they?
Oh my gosh, I was telling the story earlier. I had a group of kids one time at a camp, and we went to sit down under the tree in the shade for a little bit, and there were no seats, and you say grab a seat. So I said grab some grass, and every kid to a T reached down, scooped up a handful of grass, and held it out to me. Like, oh
no.
Very good.
I think that's a really nice way to bring our conversation to a close, because we're getting to that point where my wife's just come in and brought me my second can of cider, which means that the conversation will get to that point where I'm almost incoherent. So I'm having that kind of birthday moment of euphoria of having a fantastic conversation with colleagues and friends who share my passion for trying to make the youth sport experience better. And I'm very grateful for you, Reed, and you, Nick, taking time out of your schedule, and for John, and doing this bit of an experiment, I suppose, getting us all together and seeing where the conversation goes, and kind of changing the game project, and the stuff that Nick and I do over here in the UK, and sort of meeting in the middle. So I really appreciate you coming on and having a conversation with me.
Loved it.
No, thank you for the invite, and I hope you've had a good birthday, and I'm going to off to go and see if I can find myself a chameleon with jazz hands.
Blend right in. Usually find them hanging out at the clubs. So,
challenge your girlfriend to feed that into the debrief with the under-21s. Chameleon with jazz hands.
Oh my gosh! Yes.
Oh yeah, I'll get her to have a go.
Let us know, and let us know how she uses it.
Surely it's got to work both ways, right?
You guys are out there playing like a bunch of chameleons with jazz hands.
Exactly. Yeah, because I can imagine the multi-million-pound footballers will be like, "What the heck are you talking about?"
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Absolutely. Very good.
Well, I just wanted to say, Stu, happy birthday. And gentlemen, I don't get to say it that often, but I read everything you guys put out, same as with John and everybody else. And so I'm grateful to be doing what I do and to be learning from you guys. And so anytime I get a chance to have a conversation with you, it's very enlightening. So thank you.
And one thing I'll say is that the next time we do this, it needs to be in person.
Yes, anytime, man, anytime. I either you guys come over here, or I still want to visit. I'm still threatening to come over here and catch an EPL game or two. So
let's make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, guys.
Sounds good to me.
Really appreciate your time. I'll see you again soon.
Sounds great. Have a good one.
See you later. Bye.